I've lived on this remote farm for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. Bears rummaging through garbage, coyotes stalking chickens, even the occasional mountain lion prowling the perimeter. But nothing prepared me for what walked into my barn that foggy October morning. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, casting everything in that ethereal pre-dawn light that makes familiar places look otherworldly. I was heading out to check on the cattle when I heard it, the soft whinny of a horse. Strange, since my own horses were pastured on the far side of the property. As I approached the barn, my boots crunching on frost-covered gravel, I saw him. A magnificent stallion, coal black with a white star on his forehead, standing just inside the entrance. He wasn't one of mine, and he certainly wasn't from any neighboring ranch. This was a wild horse, untamed and powerful, his muscles rippling beneath a coat that gleamed despite the dirt and burrs tangled in his mane. But it wasn't his presence that stopped me cold. It was what he carried. Draped across his back, secured with what looked like makeshift rope, was a bundle wrapped in an old tarp. The horse stood perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on me with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting. I took a cautious step forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. The stallion snorted softly but didn't move. Whatever he was carrying, whatever had brought him to my barn in the pre-dawn darkness, I knew my quiet life was about to change forever. The stallion watched me with those impossibly intelligent eyes as I circled around to get a better look at his burden. My hands trembled as I reached toward the tarp-wrapped bundle, and the horse actually lowered his head, as if giving me permission. The rope was crude but effective, tied with knots I didn't recognize. As I worked to loosen them, the stallion remained perfectly still, his breathing steady and calm. It was as if he understood the gravity of this moment better than I did. When the tarp finally fell away, I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. There, unconscious but breathing, was a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her dark hair matted with leaves and twigs. But she was alive. My mind raced. How had this wild horse found her? Why had he brought her here? And most importantly, where had she come from? The nearest town was 40 miles away, and there were no missing child reports on the radio that I'd heard. The girl stirred slightly, murmuring something I couldn't understand. The stallion nickered softly, a sound so gentle it could have been a lullaby. I realized then that this magnificent creature had been protecting her, carrying her to safety through the wilderness. I carefully lifted the child from the horse's back, surprised by how light she was. The stallion stepped aside but didn't leave. Instead, he followed as I carried her toward the house, his hooves clicking softly on the barn floor. Whatever story this girl had to tell, whatever had happened to bring her into the care of a wild horse, I knew it would be extraordinary. I laid the girl on my living room couch, covering her with my grandmother's quilt. She was so small, so fragile, yet there was something resilient about her even in unconsciousness. Her breathing was steady, and aside from some scrapes and bruises, she appeared unharmed. The stallion had followed us to the porch, where he now stood guard like a sentinel. Every few minutes, he would crane his neck toward the window, checking on his precious cargo. I'd never seen anything like it. I called Doc Harrison, the only medical professional within 50 miles. While waiting for him to arrive, I sat beside the girl, studying her face. She had delicate features, olive skin, and calloused hands that suggested she wasn't a stranger to hard work. Her clothes, though torn, were well made. When she finally opened her eyes, they were the deepest brown I'd ever seen, filled with a wisdom that seemed far too old for her young face. She didn't cry or panic. Instead, she looked around calmly, taking in her surroundings. "Where is Thunder?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thunder?" She sat up slowly, wincing. "The black horse. He brought me here. I gestured toward the window. "He's right outside. He hasn't left." Relief flooded her features. "He saved me," she said simply. "When the men came, Thunder found me hiding in the cave. He told me to climb on his back." Told her? I wanted to ask what she meant, but something in her eyes warned me to listen rather than question. This child had been through something traumatic, and the last thing she needed was my skepticism. Outside, Thunder whinnied softly, as if he knew we were talking about him. Doc Harrison arrived within the hour, his weathered face creased with concern as he examined the girl. She was dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise unharmed. While he worked, she told me her name was Elena, and her story was more incredible than I could have imagined. She lived with her grandfather in a hidden valley about 30 miles north, a place so remote it didn't appear on any map. They were the last of their family, descendants of settlers who had chosen isolation over civilization decades ago. Her grandfather was a horse whisperer, she explained, someone who could communicate with wild animals in ways most people couldn't understand. "Grandfather taught me the old ways," Elena said, accepting a cup of warm milk. "How to listen to the horses, how to understand what they're telling us. Thunder has been watching over our valley for years." 3 days ago, men had come to their hidden homestead. They wore expensive clothes and drove black SUVs, completely out of place in the wilderness. They claimed to represent a mining company that had rights to the land, but Elena's grandfather knew better. The valley contained something far more valuable than minerals. "They wanted the spring," Elena whispered. "The sacred spring where the horses come to drink. Grandfather said it was protected by old laws, but the men didn't care about laws. When her grandfather refused to leave, the men became violent. Elena had hidden in a cave system behind their cabin while her grandfather tried to reason with them. That's when Thunder found her, a wild stallion who had been protecting the valley's secrets for longer than anyone remembered. The horse had somehow known she needed help. Elena's connection with Thunder was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. While Doc Harrison finished his examination, she walked outside to where the stallion waited. I followed, mesmerized by what I saw. The girl placed her small hand on Thunder's massive neck, and they seemed to communicate without words. The horse would bob his head, snort softly, or stamp his hooves, and Elena would nod as if receiving detailed instructions. "He says there's no time," she told me, her young face grave with responsibility. "The men are still in the valley. They're destroying everything, looking for the spring." "What's so special about this spring?" I asked. Elena looked at me with those ancient eyes. "It's where the wild horses have gathered for generations. Grandfather says it's a sacred place, protected by spirits. The water has healing properties, but only when the horses are free to drink from it." Thunder snorted and pawed the ground impatiently. "He wants us to come back with him," Elena translated. "He says grandfather is hurt but alive. The men have him trapped in the cabin." My practical mind rebelled against the impossibility of it all. A wild horse asking for help? A sacred spring? But looking at Elena's determined face and Thunder's intelligent eyes, I found myself believing. "It's dangerous," I said. "We should call the authorities." Elena shook her head. "The valley is hidden. No one would find it without Thunder to guide them, and by then it might be too late." Thunder whinnied urgently, as if agreeing with her assessment. I realized I was being recruited for a rescue mission by a wild horse and a 9-year-old girl. Somehow, that felt perfectly reasonable. Doc Harrison tried to talk us out of it, but Elena's determination was infectious. She insisted her grandfather needed immediate help, and Thunder's agitation suggested time was running short. Against my better judgment, I found myself preparing for a journey into the unknown. I loaded my truck with supplies, first aid kit, rope, tools, and my grandfather's old hunting rifle. Elena watched me with approval while Thunder paced restlessly near the barn. "He says we can't take the truck all the way," Elena informed me. "The last part has to be on horseback." I saddled my most reliable mount, a steady mare named Bella, while Elena climbed onto Thunder's back as naturally as if she'd been born there. The stallion had no saddle or bridle, yet he responded to her slightest movement. As we set out across the rugged terrain, Thunder led the way with an urgency that spoke of deep concern. He knew paths through the wilderness that I'd never seen, despite living here for 15 years. We climbed through dense forest, crossed rocky streams, and navigated narrow mountain passes that seemed impassable. Elena rode with the confidence of someone who'd grown up in the saddle, her small hands tangled in Thunder's mane. Occasionally, she would lean forward and whisper something to the horse, and he would adjust our course. "How long has Thunder been protecting your valley?" I asked during a brief rest. "Grandfather says Thunder's father and grandfather did the same thing," Elena replied. "It's been their family's responsibility for generations, just like it's been ours." The idea of inherited duty passed down through bloodlines, both human and equine, was strangely moving. We were part of something much larger than ourselves. After 4 hours of riding through increasingly wild terrain, Thunder suddenly stopped at what appeared to be a solid rock face. Elena slipped from his back and approached a narrow crevice I hadn't even noticed. She pressed her hand against a specific spot on the stone, and to my amazement, a section of the rock swung inward. "Grandfather's great-grandfather built this entrance," Elena explained as we led our horses through the hidden passage. "He wanted to make sure the valley stayed secret." The passage opened into the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. A circular valley stretched before us, surrounded by towering cliffs that created a natural fortress. A crystal-clear stream wound through emerald meadows, and at the valley's heart stood an ancient spring surrounded by smooth stones. But the beauty was marred by destruction. Tire tracks scarred the pristine grass, and I could see where heavy machinery had torn up sections of the meadow. 3 black SUVs were parked near a modest log cabin, and the sound of diesel generators filled the air. Thunder's muscles tensed beneath his coat, and he let out a low, dangerous whinny. Elena placed a calming hand on his neck. "Easy, boy. We need to be smart about this." From our vantage point behind a cluster of boulders, I could see men in expensive suits, directing workers who were setting up drilling equipment near the spring. The sacred water that had drawn wild horses for generations was about to be violated by corporate greed. "There," Elena whispered, pointing toward the cabin. "Grandfather's inside." Through the cabin's window, I could see an elderly man tied to a chair, his white hair disheveled but his posture defiant. Even from a distance, I could tell where Elena got her strength. We spent an hour observing the men's patterns, counting their numbers and noting their equipment. There were 6 of them total, 4 workers and 2 men in suits who were clearly in charge. They'd set up a sophisticated drilling operation, complete with geological survey equipment and water testing apparatus. They're not just after the water, I realized. They're studying it. Elena nodded grimly. Grandfather always said the spring was special. The horses that drink from it live longer, stay healthier. If these men figure out why. She didn't need to finish. I could imagine the commercialization, the destruction of this pristine valley in the name of profit. Thunder had been growing increasingly agitated, and suddenly he let out a piercing whinny that echoed off the valley walls. The sound was answered by other horses, dozens of them emerging from hidden places throughout the valley. Wild horses of every color and size, all converging on our location. "The herd," Elena breathed. Thunder called the herd. The men by the drilling equipment stopped their work, pointing and shouting as horses appeared from every direction. But these weren't random wild animals. They moved with purpose, surrounding the operation in a coordinated pattern that spoke of intelligence and planning. "They're going to create a distraction," Elena said, her eyes shining with excitement. "While the men are dealing with the horses, we can get to Grandfather." I watched in amazement as Thunder descended into the valley, leading his herd in what could only be described as a cavalry charge. The horses didn't attack the men directly, but they made their presence known, knocking over equipment, scattering tools, and generally creating chaos. It was our chance. The valley erupted into pandemonium as Thunder's herd swept through the drilling site. Horses wheeled and charged, their hooves thundering against the earth as the men scrambled for safety. Equipment toppled, and shouts filled the air as the corporate invaders found themselves completely outmaneuvered by the wild inhabitants of this sacred place. Elena and I used the confusion to approach the cabin from the rear. The two guards who had been posted outside were now helping their colleagues deal with the equine uprising, leaving the building temporarily undefended. I picked the simple lock on the back door while Elena kept watch. Inside, we found her grandfather exactly where we'd seen him through the window, tied to a chair, but alert and unharmed. "Elena!" His weathered face broke into a smile of relief. "I knew Thunder would find you." "We're getting you out of here, grandfather," she said, working quickly to untie his bonds. The old man's eyes met mine as I helped him to his feet. "You must be the neighbor Thunder chose to help," he said with surprising calmness. "I'm Samuel Crow Feather." "How did you know?" "Thunder told me he was bringing Elena to someone trustworthy," Samuel explained as we helped him toward the door. "He's an excellent judge of character." Outside, the chaos continued. The horses had the men completely overwhelmed, but I knew it wouldn't last long. Someone would eventually think to use tranquilizer guns or call for backup. "We need to get to the spring," Samuel said urgently. "There's something there I need to retrieve before these men destroy everything." "Grandfather, you're hurt," Elena protested. "I'm fine, child, but the valley's protection depends on what's hidden at the spring. We can't let them find it." Samuel led us through the chaos toward the heart of the valley, moving with surprising agility for someone who'd been held captive. The horses seemed to sense our mission, creating a protective corridor as we made our way to the ancient spring. The water bubbled up from deep underground, crystal clear and impossibly pure. Smooth stones surrounded the pool, worn by countless generations of horses who had come here to drink. But it was what lay beneath the water that made Samuel wade directly into the spring. "Help me," he called, reaching down into the pool. Together we lifted a heavy stone box from the spring's bottom. It was carved with symbols I didn't recognize, sealed with what looked like tree resin that had hardened over many years. "What is it?" I asked. "The real reason they want this valley," Samuel replied, cradling the box protectively. "This contains the original treaty that established this land as a permanent sanctuary for the wild horses. It was signed by my great-great-grandfather and representatives of the federal government in 1887. Elena's eyes widened. "The treaty grandfather told me about?" "The one that makes this entire operation illegal," Samuel confirmed. "These men know about it, which is why they needed me out of the way. Without the treaty, they could claim the land through mineral rights. With it, a gunshot cracked through the air and we all ducked instinctively. The men had regrouped and were now trying to drive off the horses with warning shots. Thunder's magnificent herd was slowly being forced back, though they retreated with dignity rather than fear. "We need to get this to the authorities," I said, taking the box from Samuel. "Not just any authorities," he replied. "There's a federal marshal in the county seat who specializes in treaty law. She's the only one who can enforce this. But first we had to escape the valley alive." Thunder appeared beside us, as if materializing from the chaos, his coat gleaming with sweat but his eyes fierce with determination. Without hesitation, Elena climbed onto his back while I helped Samuel mount Bella. The old man was tougher than he looked, but I could see the strain of his ordeal beginning to show. The men had noticed our movement toward the spring and were now converging on our position. One of the suited executives was shouting orders while pointing directly at us. They knew we'd found something important. "This way!" Samuel called, directing us toward a different exit than the one Elena and I had used. "There's another passage that leads directly to the main road." Thunder needed no guidance, following paths that seemed to exist only in his memory. The other horses of his herd had spread out across the valley, continuing to harass the drilling operation and buy us precious time. Their sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. As we climbed toward the hidden exit, I could hear engines starting behind us. The men were giving chase, but their vehicles would be useless in the narrow mountain passages we were navigating. "How far to this other exit?" I called to Samuel. 20 minutes if we push hard," he replied, his voice strained but determined. Elena leaned forward on Thunder's neck, whispering urgently to the stallion. His pace increased, and I had to push Bella to keep up. The treaty box was secured in my saddlebags, its weight seeming to grow heavier with each step. Behind us, the sound of pursuit grew fainter as we climbed higher into terrain no vehicle could follow. But I knew the men wouldn't give up easily. Too much was at stake. "They'll be waiting for us at the road," I warned Samuel. "Perhaps," he replied with a slight smile. "But they don't know about Thunder's friends." Samuel's cryptic comment became clear as we approached the hidden exit. Waiting for us at the road were not the corporate thugs I'd expected, but a convoy of pickup trucks filled with Native American men and women. They wore the insignia of the local tribal police, and their faces were grim with purpose. "How did they know?" I asked in amazement. "Thunder has many ways of sending messages," Samuel replied. "My nephew works for tribal law enforcement. When I didn't check in yesterday, he started making calls." Elena slipped down from Thunder's back and ran to embrace a young man who could only be Samuel's grandson. The family resemblance was unmistakable, from the intelligent dark eyes to the way he moved with quiet confidence. "Uncle Samuel," the young man said, relief evident in his voice. "When we got word about the drilling operation, we contacted the federal marshal. She's on her way." "David, meet our neighbor," Samuel said, introducing me to his nephew. "He helped Elena and Thunder rescue me." David shook my hand firmly. "We owe you a debt." "The horses did most of the work," I replied honestly. Thunder had followed us to the road, but now he stood apart, his head raised, as if listening to something only he could hear. Suddenly, he let out a long, mournful whinny that seemed to carry across the entire mountain range. "What's wrong?" Elena asked, approaching the stallion with concern. Samuel's face grew grave. "He's calling his herd to retreat. The men in the valley, they're not giving up. They're bringing in helicopters." In the distance, we could indeed hear the rhythmic thump of rotor blades. The corporate interests behind this operation had resources we hadn't anticipated. "We need to get that treaty to the marshal immediately," David said urgently. But Thunder had other plans. Thunder reared up on his hind legs, his magnificent form silhouetted against the mountain sky. His whinny echoed across the peaks, and from every direction came answering calls. Not just from his own herd, but from wild horses throughout the entire region. "He's calling them all," Samuel whispered in awe. "Every free horse in 100 miles. Elena placed her hand on Thunder's neck, and I could see tears in her eyes. "He says this is the last stand. If we don't stop them now, there won't be another chance." The sound of helicopters grew louder, and we could see them approaching the valley. 3 military-style aircraft that had no business in civilian airspace. These weren't just corporate executives. They had government connections that ran deep. "The treaty won't matter if they destroy the evidence," David realized. "They're going to claim the horses attacked first, that they had to defend themselves." Thunder looked directly at me then, his dark eyes holding a weight of responsibility I'd never felt before. Somehow, I understood what he was asking. "I'll take the treaty to the marshal," I told Samuel. "But you need to document what's happening here. Get video evidence of the helicopters, the illegal drilling, everything." "What about Thunder?" Elena asked, her voice breaking. The stallion nuzzled her gently, then turned and galloped back toward the valley. Within moments, horses began streaming past us. Dozens, then hundreds of wild horses answering Thunder's call. They moved like a river of muscle and determination, flowing toward their ancestral home. "He's protecting the valley," Samuel said softly, "just like his father and grandfather before him." I climbed into David's truck, the treaty box secure beside me. As we drove toward town, I could see the horses gathering on the ridges around the valley, a living barrier between the corporate invaders and the sacred spring. Thunder had chosen his battlefield. Federal Marshal Rebecca Santos arrived with a convoy of federal agents just as the helicopters began their assault on the valley. The video footage David's team had captured, combined with the 1887 treaty, created an ironclad case that stopped the operation in its tracks. The corporate executives were arrested on charges ranging from trespassing on federal land to violating the Endangered Species Act. The helicopters were grounded, and the drilling equipment was seized as evidence. But the real victory belonged to Thunder and his herd. When the dust settled and the last of the corporate vehicles had been towed away, we returned to the valley to find it transformed. The horses had not only defended their home, but had somehow restored it. The tire tracks were gone, covered by fresh grass that seemed to have grown overnight. The spring bubbled clear and pure, as if it had never been threatened. Thunder stood at the water's edge, his herd gathered around him in a circle of protection. When he saw Elena approaching, he whinnied softly and lowered his great head to nuzzle her cheek. "He says thank you," Elena translated, her voice thick with emotion, "for believing in him when no one else would." Samuel placed his weathered hand on my shoulder. "The valley will always be safe now. The treaty is registered with the federal government, and the horses have legal protection." As the sun set over the hidden valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I watched Thunder lead his herd to the spring for their evening drink. The sacred water reflected their forms like a mirror, creating the illusion that there were twice as many horses as reality held. Maybe there were. Maybe the spirits of all the horses who had protected this place over the generations were there too, finally at peace. I rode home that evening with a heart full of wonder, and a story I knew few people would believe. But sometimes the most important truths are the ones that sound impossible. Thunder had walked into my barn at dawn, carrying a child who needed help. In saving her, we had all saved something much larger, a piece of the wild world that still existed, still fought for its right to remain free. Thank you for listening to this incredible story of Thunder Elena and the sacred valley that wild horses have protected for generations. It reminds us that sometimes the most extraordinary heroes come in unexpected forms, and that the bond between humans and animals can overcome even the greatest challenges. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more amazing true stories like this one. Your support helps me continue sharing these remarkable tales of courage, friendship, and the enduring power of the wild. Until next time, keep believing in the impossible.